Hey, I know you've heard me talk about Covenant Eyes many times. It's our internet filtering and accountability software that we use on every one of our devices, computer, phone, iPads, my family, my staff. And we are happy to tell you that we are now an affiliate. We're partnering with Covenant Eyes, and we'd like to encourage you to check it out. Go to covenanteyes.com. Promo code you want to use is DNB, David and Bethley, DNB Young. And put that in and check it out, and then let us know what you think. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethley.
And we are the Youngs. Thanks for joining us again today.
Yes, welcome.
And thank you for joining us last week as we talked about Covenant Eyes. Mm-hmm. And if you were not able to hear that one, I recommend that you do.
Go back and listen.
It's an important matter. We've had a phenomenal summer. It's been a crazy, busy summer.
It's been awesome.
Way back some weeks ago, we recorded in one sitting all of the Deuteronomy passages at one time.
And, I think we did two.
We split it up twice.
We did two, and then we did I don't know, three or four in a row.
And it was because our summer's been crazy. We've been in and out, and we've traveled thousands of miles.
But beautiful
miles. We've been in northern Michigan. We've been in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado.
Yes.
We've been in Nebraska and Kansas and Illinois and Iowa.
We were driving through Kansas. All of you from Kansas, don't be offended by this, but Charity was in the back seat, and we had been driving through Kansas for a while, and she said, "Is this all there is in Kansas?"
And,
the farmland. I think it's beautiful. I grew up in Ohio, and so I love the farmland, but it was just
there was
funny
corn
to hear
everywhere.
her.
We felt like it was stalking up on us.
Oh. The dad jokes are creeping in.
They're a little
corny.
I know, they're a little corny.
We mentioned our traveling, and this is what he would do to entertain our children as we were traveling.
Actually, just to make them roll their eyes and sigh.
And groan and go back to their phone.
And that's valid, dads. That's valid.
Yes.
It is. It's been a great summer, though. We had great camps. We've had several family conferences.
Yes.
And it's just been a tremendous summer. And then we had a wedding.
Yay.
And our Matthew and Kareth are now married. That's number 3 wedding in our family.
And it was lovely.
It was just absolutely beautiful. Dave and Abby, of course, are married and live in California. Josh and Bethany are married and live in California.
Yes.
And now Matt and Kareth are living in Alabama.
Yay, that's closer to
so
us.
A little bit closer. And we're just so thankful. God's been so good to our children. Our Jacob's getting ready to go to college here in a few weeks.
Yes, not getting married, just going to college.
Actually, this week. And so he's
heading. Oh, yes, the week of this podcast.
Yes, he's heading to college, and we're excited for him. But,
yes, we are.
At the same time, you parents understand.
It's a little bittersweet.
It's like, but we're so proud of how the Lord's working in our children. Well, someone reached out to me again recently and said, hey, we have children, and we have a lot of questions about this dating. How did you guys do it? What rules, what standards? How did you help your children to play the dating game or not play the dating game? And what did you do to help your children, 3 so far, get to marriage? It's a valid question.
Such a good question. There's a lot of prayer, a lot of grace.
A whole lot of prayer. And there's even some of that is like, sometimes we have to stop and think, wow, what did we do? How did we make this happen? And you moms and dads understand that because life's so busy and the daily part of living is just life.
There are things that you get in your mind when you have little ones that you think this is how it's going to go, and it doesn't matter what happens on the outside of this house. This is what we're going to do. And then real life happens, and you have to either pray through your philosophy of dating and reevaluate your philosophy of dating, maybe come up with a new philosophy of dating, or maybe just do the hard thing as a parent and say, no, this is what we do in our family.
And we do. So here's Dating and Marriage, Our Family Story.
This is going to be a long podcast.
It could be. We get these questions often, though. What do you do about dating? And what do you do to help your older ones get to the wedding?
Right.
And those are valid questions. So here's some beginning thoughts. Let's just jump into some beginning thoughts.
Alrighty.
And this one's so important, but it needs to be said. Dating is not in the Bible. But don't miss this. Neither is courting.
No.
The two options we find all the time on the road is people either practice dating or people can sometimes Some of us who are a little more concerned to be like, well, we don't do the dating thing. We believe in courting.
Right.
But I've come to the conclusion that dating isn't in the Bible and neither is courting.
Neither is courting.
In fact, finding a spouse is not discussed specifically in the Bible. He says some things like, he that finds a wife finds a good thing, which implies that marriage is going to take some searching, because finding implies I looked for a wife and found the wife. True. He does say that marriage is honorable in all, so we know that the Bible is very pro-marriage. Mm-hmm. Paul even says it's better to marry than to burn with passion. Some might even take that to be it's better to marry than to be burned, because I was reading in Proverbs maybe a comparative and companion passage there where he says, he that goes into a woman he shouldn't go into, the adulterous woman.
Yes.
He will have his feet burned with hot coals.
Yes,
and
it's
so
like
forth.
going on hot coals.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so finding a spouse is not discussed specifically. And so here's what I did. I went through the Bible and I thought of all the ways in the Bible, illustrations in the Bible of how they found a wife. And actually it's kind of shocking. If you go to the book of Genesis, apparently Cain married his sister.
Yes.
And that's a little shocking.
We don't do that in this culture.
Nope. Abraham, who was very wealthy, got his servant and sent his servant and said, now I want you to go to our relatives and I want you to find a wife for my son.
Right.
And so I remember teasing our kids a couple of times along the way about we could go visit some relatives and get you a spouse.
Oh dear.
But we don't have a servant to send. So
we don't have a servant.
So that kind of ruled that one out. That's a different one.
Sometimes it's illegal to marry your family.
That's true. But a lot of folks, and I don't say this to to attack anybody, but a lot of folks will use the story of Abraham as the model. But it is a little difficult in the sense that the model breaks down if you take it all the way, because
you can't do it literally.
We don't do the servants. We certainly wouldn't send them to our relatives.
No.
The one lesson maybe we can learn from it is that moms and dads can certainly have a massive amount of influence on who their children marry.
True.
That may be there. Well, here was Jacob. Later in the book of Genesis, he worked 14 years or 7 years each to purchase 2 sisters to be his wives.
Mm-hmm. And then he also married their servants.
I don't recommend that method either. David, this one's a little tricky, so hang with me here.
This is might need to
David killed,
turn it off for your kids.
David killed 200 Philistines and offered their foreskins as a dowry to King Saul in order to marry his daughter Michal. That would be a very strange request to make of your future son-in-law.
At least the Bible indicates that she already loved him and wanted to marry him.
She already did.
So he didn't need to do that for her, just for her dad.
Just for King Saul. The Benjamites in the book of Judges, they stole their wives at a festival celebration. I think it was 600 of them, actually. And so they broke up.
Let's go down to this party, and you boys just run in there and grab yourself a wife.
And then the other folks that sent them in said, if the people at the party get upset, we'll defend you with our army. And even one of the other, that's kind of an odd one, is when God told Hosea to marry an adulterous woman who would later become a prostitute. These are how the Bible describes all these ways of finding a wife.
Right.
And most of them are very odd to us.
Right.
And probably are not the norm.
No, we do know from Scripture in that time that many times women were purchased in marriage, and it was just to make an alliance, whether that be a political alliance or a financial alliance or just an alliance for a relationship with family, whether it be for land or whatever. We do know from the story of Ruth that she had a kinsman redeemer. That's a beautiful story. But also a little weird in that Ruth went and kind of proposed to Boaz in the middle of the night as she was laying at his feet, which is, another discussion. Unique story. And there are cultures around the world, I think, today that still would offer their daughters as some type of political alliance, financial alliance. But in America, and certainly in the Christian realm, we don't do that.
Yeah, and even in the book of Corinthians, when Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, a lot of men there would have had more than one wife, one to take care of the cooking, one to take care of the kids, one to handle the clothing, one to take care of the goats. Is
that what they all? I just wondered, why would you have that many wives?
It was, and even in the Arab world, in some places where they have multiple wives, that's why. The wives are assigned different roles. They marry a wife to take care of different roles in their particular family situation.
Yeah.
And one of the things Paul addressed in the book of Corinth was that they didn't marry a wife for married relations. They had the temple prostitutes to where the sexual relations took place.
Right.
And it was not even part of the equation often in relation to a wife. And so it was, Paul addressed all of that and promotes marriage, which is what we want to promote. We are believers.
Right.
And as Christians, we want to do everything we can to help our children to navigate the world they live in.
Yes.
And to end up in a happy marriage relationship.
So basically what we're saying through this introduction is that while we do have biblical principle to jump off of, there is not a set command or even illustration in Scripture that we can follow literally in order to make sure that our children grow up and get married in the right way.
Yeah, and I think the reason that's so is because the Bible is timeless.
Right.
And culture changes.
Yes.
And so that God gives us general principles rather than specifics that in some cultures the specifics would have been very out there and awkward and almost impossible to follow.
Yes.
So a lot of what we've learned is going through the Bible is learning general principles and obedience to specific commands that are applied to those principles.
Right.
That by God's grace and God's help so far has helped our children to navigate this issue of dating relations, courting relations, and also to help prepare them for marriage.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about that. Before we get started, let's take a break and let our listeners know about one of our sponsors of our Keeping It Young podcast.
As you know, David and I have been overwhelmed with the support we've received through this podcast. Thank you very much. One of the special relationships we formed as a result of this work is with a gentleman by the name of Mike Gleason. Mike is one of the owners of First Insurance Group, and he primarily works with churches in Indiana and Ohio area. His work is unique in that he has an incredible passion and ministry in protecting local churches and in saving local churches money. Mike is a wonderful Christian, attends church with our very own producer, Jamin Baxter, and in January alone helped 16 ministries save $53,000 in premiums.
Mike can help your church with all kinds of issues, things like, does your church have an armed security team, and do you have all the paperwork and documentation that would be necessary to protect yourself and your church if that team ever had to use deadly force, and things of that sort. His company will give you a risk management system. They will work with your church to adopt policies that are admissible in court to protect your local church. Bethany and I heartily recommend Mike Gleason and First Insurance Group. Contact him. Let him look over the policy you have. He'll do it for free with no obligation on your part. We trust Mike, and we want to recommend that you do as well. There are 3 ways you can reach him. You can email him at MikeG@FIG-Protects, F-I-G, First Insurance Group, FIGprotects.com, or go to the website FIGprotectschurches.com. Again, that's FIGprotectschurches.com. You can also reach out to him at 812-355-4612. And be sure when you reach out to him to let him know that Keeping It Young podcast recommended him to you. If you need further information, let us know. All right, now let's talk about this dating and marriage as it relates to how we did it in our family. How did we handle dating?
Yes.
And how has it helped us to prepare our kids for marriage? So let's give the first answer.
Okay, first answer. This actually is based on a sermon that David preaches to teenagers, but we are going to reinvent it, I guess, for you as parents.
Yes.
And so the first thing that we teach our children is don't date, wait.
In other words, we would say that as a sentence, we don't date.
Right.
We wait. Or another way of saying that is that in our family, we decided that we would not allow our children to play the dating game. Instead, we would prepare our children for marriage.
Yes.
Now, that's a huge difference.
Yes, it is.
In other words, we're not against boy-girl relationships at all. In fact, we taught our children this. We taught our children to like everybody.
Yes.
So that we would say to our boys, and as we'd cross the country, there were, always girls that would catch their eye, and especially girls in which our son would catch their eye. And so we just said to our boys, never, lock yourself into a single focus relationship when you're 13, 14, 15, 16, or 9, or 18, or sometimes when you're 20. just like everybody.
Yes.
That's the whole point of don't date. It's just like everybody. Get to know all of them. Be friends with everybody.
Yes.
Learn how people are and be friends with them. You can make a ton of friendships that way with a whole lot less baggage if you'll just like everybody.
Yes.
And not lock yourself
in.
And
learn how the male-female relationship is different. It is amazing to me talking to our married children now, or even older kids, where sometimes someone around their age will be surprised by how guys are different from girls and vice versa. Yeah. And our kids are just like, duh, she's a girl, or duh, he's a guy. Yeah. That's how they are. And they learned that not by locking themselves into, well, I like you, do you like me relationship when they were 14. They learned that by just being friends with a lot of people. And also
the you're mine and I'm yours and nobody else has a right to us.
Yes.
And one of the things that our children, I think, learn in that is that some of the issues in life, sometimes in a marriage counseling situation, someone will say, well, my wife is da-da-da-da-da-da. And often the point there is not that your wife is that way, it's that she's a woman, and all women are that way.
Right.
And it's not just that your husband is that way, it's that he's a guy. All guys are that way. That changes your perspective.
It does.
So we wanted our children to not be a part of, don't play the dating game. Instead, use your teenage years, especially these years, to prepare for marriage.
Right.
And that's a whole different situation. We don't date. We don't let our kids date until they are ready to be a spouse,
right,
and ready to find a spouse.
Yes.
and you may be ready to find a spouse before you're ready to be a spouse. Well, then the dating doesn't make sense.
Right.
There's no reason to date and have that exclusive, one-on-one, intense, emotional relationship,
right,
unless you're ready to be that person's spouse, and unless they are ready also to be a spouse.
Right.
And so this was just our thinking process. We taught our kids early. We don't date. We're not playing that dating game.
Right.
So our children never had that little thing about, oh my goodness, she's mine and he's mine and we're alone and we're the only ones.
We always sit together in youth group. We always sit together in Sunday school. No.
And we also taught our kids in light of that your best friend as a guy should be another guy.
Yes.
And as a girl, your best friend should be another girl.
And that is one of the things, too, that teenage dating relationship, it will take away from. You don't get to develop those strong girl and girl relationship, guy and guy relationship.
Yeah, and those are important.
They're very important.
Very important part of life. So for us, the dating game was if we could even use that, the courting, the dating situation. Sometimes I'll joke with teenagers. They'll say, do you believe in dating or courting? And I'll say, neither. I believe in dorting. and they always roll their eyes at me on that one. But for us, college is the beginning of that process of dating.
Right.
And for us, because we believe so strongly in Christian college education, and this is just an aside here, I know sometimes our Christian school parents, once their children are finished with a Christian school, they fight so hard for the Christian school, then they're like, well, you know what? We don't believe in Christian college education. We want our kids to go to a secular education. And oftentimes they undo everything they've laid a groundwork for.
Right.
But for us, we homeschooled our children. Some would say it's because you travel all the time and it was the only way. Maybe in the early days that was true. But as our children, as we became more familiar with the benefits of our homeschooling and how we could see our children and work with them on an individual basis and disciple them in the process, homeschooling became a real strong point for us. We don't think it's the only way. We don't fight with you about it. We don't make a big deal about it, but it is strong to us. And it culminates with a Christian college education.
Right.
We have discovered that almost any major, if not any major, that is worth having can be attained at a Christian college.
Absolutely.
And here's how that works for us. A Christian college environment is a controlled environment, especially the Christian colleges that we would choose.
Right.
And that controlled environment even helped me in Bethlehem. We attended Pensacola Christian College, a controlled environment, arguably more strict in those days than today.
No, probably. But still they're very conservative.
Yeah, still conservative. Yes. But for us, it was wonderful. We look back at it. We had the privilege of, we could have all kinds of conversations.
Yes.
All kinds of events together in an environment that protected our purity, protected our relationship, protected our testimony.
Yes.
And so for us, it started with a Christian college.
Yes.
And talk about that just a little bit, about Abby meeting David and Josh, Bethany, and so forth.
Well, it all started with our children, too, going to college. And it's kind of a big deal because our Jacob is getting ready to go. He's headed off to West Coast Baptist College, where his 3 siblings also attended.
And he announced the other day, I'll be married by Christmas.
But it's a big deal, because our children then know we have matured enough that our parents are going to allow us to go on to college. And if we want to get to know someone of the opposite sex, it's okay.
Yeah, and we encourage it.
In a dating way, instead of just a friendship sort of way where they have been doing up till that time. So Abigail went off to West Coast Baptist College. When was that? 6 years ago?
It was a long time ago.
It was 7 years ago. And she, of course, being a girl and being trained by us not to be the aggressor, to be feminine and not a feminist, she was waiting then for the Lord just to bring different young men into her life. And I will say that Abby's freshman year and even into her sophomore year a little bit, there were some young men that were interested in her that did not pass the daddy test.
And that's not a mean test.
And not a bad thing. It's not that they are bad young men.
I'm friends with both of those young men.
Yes. So it was not that they were bad young men. They just weren't the young men for our daughter. And I think you as a parent will know what that means when I say that.
There were some issues that at the point didn't mean they were not an option. It meant this is not the right timing.
Right.
And what I look for, are everything from how are you doing with purity, how are you doing with your emotions.
Yes.
So that if there's an anger issue, okay, that doesn't mean you're a no. It means the timing is not right until you learn how to handle this matter.
You need to work on some things.
So we're not trying to be mean at any young man.
Right.
But we were always looking, where are you? Are you ready for this? And if we felt like you're not quite ready for this, then I was always willing to work with a young man to help him get ready.
Yes.
So Abby had several of those kind of options.
So there were a couple of those things that, yes, it was not the Lord's will.
Just obviously we look back at it and we can see that, and she can too.
And she can too. And we had our children's hearts before they went to college, and so that was sometimes a difficult conversation to have, but it did not end in rebellion.
Right.
And so Abigail just waited on the Lord, and she was in a literature class actually at West Coast Baptist College. And she called me one day and she said, I've been emailing with my literature professor for an hour. And I said, oh, is he married? Which I kind of knew the answer to that already. It just was the first thing that popped into my head, and maybe it shouldn't have been. But she said, no, he's not married. And she said, I just don't know. It seems to be, they were emailing over a project or a quiz or something. And she said, it just seems to be getting a little more personal as we're emailing. And I said, well, just, prayerfully and carefully go forward. You just need to know what the college rules are and so on, because he was a professor.
And keep us in the loop.
Yes, and keep us in the loop. And they did. And it ended up that, now, of course, David and Abby are now married. He was her professor. But they went through all the right channels. And, of course, David perfectly God's will for our Abigail's life. Josh and Bethany, they met because her mom and his mom both suggested each of them over Christmas break.
Yeah, were they juniors?
I think they were going back for their second semester sophomore.
Yeah, and so
year.
The question now, I can remember being on the outside listening as Bethany said to Josh, "Is there any girl you would have interest in?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, there's Bethany." But he said, I don't know that she would go out with me. I think she wants to be a single missionary.
Yes.
and unbeknownst to us at the time, her mother is having the same conversation
Sarah was
in
having
Texas.
That conversation with Bethany.
And so Bethany was encouraging Josh. And what we look at back at that, we see the fingerprints of God in that.
Absolutely.
And we've known Bethany's parents since college days.
Yes.
And I've preached several times for her dad around the country, and we've connected at a few camps here and there as we've crossed paths at camps.
Yeah.
And so that was a really special one.
Yes, it was special. And we could go on about Matt and Kareth, but we won't take the time to do that. Matt and Kareth met their freshman year. 2 weeks into the freshman year that Matthew said, I'm done with girls. I'm not doing girls. I can't just.
He had a little situation in which we said, this is not what we're doing, and you're not doing that. This was between his senior and freshman.
Yes.
And he knows all about this. We even talked about it recently at the rehearsal.
Yes.
And so his whole deal was, I'm just done.
I'm finished.
I'm not going to look at any girl. And then like a week after he told me that, he called me. He texted me with all these exclamation points. Dad, I got to talk to you about a girl.
And now they're married.
And just a couple of weeks ago.
And we love her too. One of the things that I was thinking about as we were talking about how our children met their spouses, and these are just very quick accounts of very long stories, but one of the things that is such a blessing is watching your child know that it's time to go ahead and date if the Lord allows that, but also resting in Him if the Lord has taken away that opportunity or not given them that opportunity yet. But also watching the 20-some years, 18 years here it will be with Jacob, of prayer every day, praying for that child and praying for their future spouse, and then watching it culminate together.
Absolutely.
Because there are so many parents that are fearful of that. What if my child goes away and they start dating the wrong person or they marry the wrong person? Don't be afraid of that because, just like I said with Abigail, there were a few red flags and we brought those to her attention and we had her heart and the Lord worked it all out and it's fine. So the Lord's not going to drop the ball if you've been praying.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time.
We are, so we need to cover the next two.
I want you to join us next week because we want to finish this one. There's still a little bit more to cover.
Yes.
And the big thing she said at the end, maybe the big takeaway of our day, don't fear.
Right.
You pray, you seek God. He loves your children. He has a plan for your children. And we'll pick up there and talk about that some more next week. Thank you for joining us. This is Keeping It Young.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production. All rights reserved.